So it's good to be here with you today and to share this space to speak about decolonizing circles, the hows, the whats, the whys, the wheres. And this is an ongoing inquiry that we have in conversation, which is based upon our own experience, our lived experience as bicultural women, and our time spent in life and also in circle spaces, some that we have facilitated and others that have been facilitated. And this is an inquiry that takes twists and turns. There's no start, middle and end that's all tidy and packaged, because what we're speaking about isn't tidy or packaged. However, this is the start of a journey of a conversation that we both feel is very important. I'm Tanya Borgen.
And I'm Sylvie Fröhlicher. And I am really excited to have this space with you, Tanya, and to be in the truth and the realness of the inquiry as it's unfolding. And as you said, we don't know what's coming through, what's coming up. We have a shared understanding. And what I loved, and you expressed that in our last conversation, was the topic is tender and it needs addressing.
Yeah.
And I really love this sentiment. And that's where the tenderness comes in. So it feels really fitting to do another tender talk around this topic of decolonizing circle and leaning into embodied inclusion. Yay! Have a dance.
Have a little dance.
Always good to start with a dance.
Always good to start with a dance.
I'm just seeing the candle in your background, and it reminds me of the fireplace in our last conversation, and it brings me warm, just like a warm, cozy, nice feeling.
We valued our time together last time, and where it went, I was like, that's so not what I was expecting. The richness of it, and like, well, okay, there's more here. There's more here than I thought. And the beauty of just landing in that present space for me was that, it really unearthed new parts, new inquiries for me to be with.
Do you want to just dive in right there? I'm really curious what we landed on some keywords, and as we were feeling into it, I'm really curious, how does it live in you today, right now?
Well, it was interesting because I started off with this, like, I don't lead from that place. That was, off the back of a conversation with a really beautiful man that I'd had, and me really inquiring in the circle space of where am I leading from in terms of my own embodied state, where am I leading from in this space? And and the conversation I had on the inside was that my days of activism were complete until we started to touch on it, and then it was like, oh no, not fully complete yet. Nice try. And but in that, like, what that's given me is more space. Like, there's more space for discernment of where I go and who I am in any given moment, and that gives me more breathing space.
Yeah, I really noticed this longing to take a moment with the sentence that you just spoke, like the space to know who I am and to know where I'm going in the moment. Like, who am I in this moment and where am I going in this? Yeah, it feels really rich and really powerful to feel that space.
It's such a big inquiry. Like, who am I and where am I going? And who are you and where are you going? And who are we and where are we going?
Yeah, and I feel the freedom in the space, like that and when I hear your inquiry around like activism and somehow what I hear, and I am curious if that lands for you, but that often the idea of activism is there's very little space between the outer stimulus and the inner response. And that something, what I heard you share is like, oh, I don't lead from that place, creates spaciousness. And then in that spaciousness, actually a more self-sourced kind of activism can arise of like, oh, like I get to choose who I am in this moment. What label do I claim for myself in this moment? Which label do I not claim? And where do I go from that place? That it's a place of discernment where I get to choose to take a topic or to take a label or to take a theme, and also the freedom to not do that and be like, nope, right now I'm not, this is not mine to take right now.
Yeah, and I think the word you touched on there, discernment, is like a word that's just been like literally circling my life at the moment. It's like just having the discernment and in that discernment, the choice of, you know, what to pick up, as you said, but also in that picking up, the knock-on effect of what I'm picking up and how that might impact me or even others. And discernment to just say no, and just like, no, this is not what I want to pick up. And to really hold that, even in the moments that are like, but if you did, you know, what could come from it, but actually just to hold that no. Is it Brené Brown? I can't remember who it is, that says no is a complete sentence. I can't remember, you know, it's like, no, to have the discernment to say no.
For me, there's a lot of question around, I guess, is it safe enough for me to joyfully speak? Like, do I have the resources to step in or like step into action in this space, in this moment? Yeah, so I'm curious, like, what are the different factors that actually would lead to not wanting to speak up in a certain context? Or what is, because there's like this part of like, yeah, it would probably serve the space to do so because there's something that is unspoken that I am feeling in me. And it would create a fuller picture if all the unspoken, like circle wisdom, if all the unspoken voices are offered into the space, we get a fuller picture and we get closer to truth. And yet, how is it an act of self-love to sometimes be like, oh, okay, right now there is this piece that I could contribute, and right now it doesn't feel like it would be nourishing, or it would be, I guess I keep coming back to this place, safe enough, that I would be met enough, cared for enough in the bigness of what will activate in me if I take it. That if I'm the only, like for me, it's often like if I'm the only person of color in a space and I pick up something, what is the aftercare that I might not have, that I would need after something that big runs through my system? So I'm kind of with this inquiry around what is it that would create a nourishing, joyful yes to like, yes, I want to bring the fullness of me into this space.
Yeah. And is it always joyful? You know, it's like if we're touching, you know, depending on the subjects we're touching on, it's like, is it always joyful? And again, I think I keep coming back to that discernment, and what I noticed you do there, Sylvie, was like, I kind of get to choose, was like in that space of breath and the moments of choosing. What I noticed is I will often choose that which is not joyful to step into, and it feels like I'm stepping into a ring of fire often. You know, it's like, because the charges come through, and it's like, this is what wants to be said. And then the knock-on effect of that is there's, you know, whatever in the space, particularly if it's around colour. And then who's left with the labour? Who's left with the emotional burden after that? Generally the person's that's spoken. And the other image I had as you were speaking there was in a circle of people, like the voices that are heard. It's like, whose voices are heard in that space? And I had an image of the quieter voices being the first voices that were heard, and then the minority voices being the first voices that were heard, and the louder voices, which often get a lot more airtime, being the voices on a kind of outer circle. It's almost like step into that inner circle where these voices get space to really be heard in a way they haven't been heard, that I've witnessed before. That we give those voices that may be seen to have less power in this space more power, more airtime. And my body is responding to that right now, like, yeah.
Yeah. I just, as I hear you share, I have like this image of like concentric circles, but like more like a flower, kind of, that there's different rings, and that there's like that the inner rings are more held by the outer rings, and these are the voices that maybe are not as good at the game of claiming space for their voice due to collective structural challenges, and whether they're internal challenges, but that there's a compensation for the ease of access, like through the geometry of how we're sitting. There's like, oh, like I would love to explore that.
Yeah. And then what I have now is then that, and then what if you're the only person of color in that space? It's like that inner circle doesn't exist. It's just one person in the middle. And for me, my bodily response to that is the loneliness of being that voice in moments.
It reminds me of the moment on our last tender talk with Jax, where you were bringing in like, what if it wasn't just one more person, but it was like you know, like a whole community and like a whole like group and together. And I'm like, wow, that would even be possible. And what I found really interesting was in that moment, the shift energetically of like, it would be really easy for me to speak up and to feel that like, oh, it's not just me personally that is struggling in finding my voice and bringing in my voice. It is so contextual. It is who's in the space, and the image of like shifting, like, oh, I wouldn't be the only person of color in this space. Suddenly I'm like, well, then I can speak. Well, then like suddenly this like contraction on the front of my body that lives in my throat, but also in my shoulders, and it goes a bit like this. Suddenly that would soften, and I could just be standing with my chest open and feeling my back supported. I'm like, oh, well, that would be easy. Is that what other people experience? Is that what privilege is?
Yeah, and I do believe that is what privilege is at some level, is the privilege to have enough safety in a space, particularly a, you know, let's say spiritual space, a community space, a circle space, however we frame it, to have enough safety in that space. Because what I experience often is a sense of individualism, in that it's a personal responsibility. The safety you have in your body is your responsibility, and your healing. And where you don't feel safe, you know, you go away in your individual little box, and you go away and you heal it, and then you come back. And then in a circle space, there's a collective healing, and the shadow of that I see is that what's not been spoken is in that collective healing space, there are people who are, you know, marginalized, or, you know, on their own in that space with their particular life experience, and it's adding to. And so a privilege in that space is to be one of the people that is not in that experience.
Yeah.
And from that privilege, there is power that I experience. And if it's unspoken, it's still there. You know, it's like it's that this, to me, is the places that we now need to bring to start to speak about. It's like, what is actually here? Space.
That brings us back to the question of like, how do we do that? Like, how do we bring those unspoken voices to like a shared, realm. So they must be spoken. And how do we make sure that the people who hold those voices are not burdened by needing to speak those voices and the aftermath of what happens after they speak it? And I think that to me is like such a big question around inclusion. Like, what does inclusion actually mean? It doesn't mean having a person of color in the space that then is left to their own devices with like needing to do all that extra labor. And there's so many different topics of marginalization, or like elements or dimensions of marginalization. And I just want to like, I guess, speak to the fact that we are zooming in on one very specific area of marginalization. In our last conversation, we were talking about, it's not about anti-racism, but it's about inclusion. And I was left with the question, is it important? And I do feel that it is important to claim the anti-racist part as well as the inclusion, because it is so easy to jump over the step of just acknowledging the wound and the power disparity, and to just be like, well, yeah, kind of like along the lines of color blindness or any marginalization blindness, to just be like, yeah, we're inclusive. We want everyone. We don't see differences between people. And I'm like, well, that's not what inclusion is. It actually requires the first step of every person really inquiring of the internalized, in this case, racism, and to own it. Yes, there are socialized racist beliefs that I have swallowed, and, like, how would I have navigated this society without taking them on? Like, it's literally impossible. They're everywhere. And that there is a step of a shared commitment of, yes, we want to be anti-racist in this space. And then the next step is like, okay, given that, how is now the inclusion coming about? There's something about the step-by-step advancing through the journey and actually sitting with the reality first before we strive for inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you speak that, what I have, I'm very visual, as you can probably tell now, is I get these images, and the images that we go in and we go down and we start to unearth, where we harm with racism. And we, if we're just speaking to race, we could bring this to so many other areas of marginalization. But if we speak with race, we might look, where are we creating harm? And what's really important, I believe, is where embodied harm comes into it. The movements, the gestures, the pullbacks, the navigating around a person of color, which are the really subtle harms that we can create around another. And for me, and actually, I don't know if you can see my bookcase here, but this bookcase is full of books around anti-racism. I've read them. I went on a journey for a number of years, 3, nearly 4 years of just reading, unlearning, and like going, oh, this is in me as well, because I had a story in myself that because I was a woman of color, I didn't have any racism within me. It was untrue. It was untrue. And the more I unearthed, the more I was like, ew. Yeah. So now there's an ability to start to track it when it arises. Yeah. It doesn't mean it's just, I read the books, it's done. It's like to be able to track is a practice in itself. And there will be still many blind spots. So if I stay on this journey, so there's a kind of journey of going in, going down, going into the shadows, looking, where is it harm? What have I learned? What have I learned in this life that is oppressive to many people? And we've spoken in the past about the oppression growing up that we experienced. And I know times are changing, in many ways, but it's still there. And then for me, and this is like I'm actually going to say it, a call out to all facilitators: go in, go down, like go and look. And then the journey up is then what we bring into the spaces, in the circle holding spaces. How do we hold? And one of the key parts in that for me is to notice, who are we calling in these spaces? What assumptions are made? There is like a whole piece of work to be done on the assumptions we make before we even land in a space. If someone hasn't journeyed into what we call an anti-racist practice, it shows up in assumptions, it shows up in language, it shows, even if the intention is beautiful, like I'm here to welcome all people, my heart is open, which is a wonderful intention to have in any circle space, but there's a missing piece. And that is to clear and to become familiar with the shadows, the learned behaviors, parents, peers, society, media, is to put the light into that shadow and have a look, so that when you, another person of color, steps into that space, there's a seeing. Like, I see you, I know it when I step into a space. And for me, that's around my discernment of knowing, where do I want to step in? What does it look like? How is it to experience that when another being has gone, do you know what? This matters enough. I'm going to turn towards this, and it's ugly, and it's uncomfortable, and it matters enough that I'm going to turn towards it and create that time and space. And for me now, the wisest place I can come from is that I let go of any expectation for someone else to do it. I don't force. I tried that, it didn't work.
For someone else to do the work, you mean?
Yeah. Like, it's none of my business anymore if someone does or doesn't do it.
I really love your call out. It's not just for us facilitators of color. It's for every single facilitator that wants to be able to hold a space that is also safe enough for people of color to step into. And it's not just done by saying, yes, the space is inclusive, everyone's welcome. That is not safe enough. And I like the image that shows up for me is different grounds that are like levels of consciousness, that there are spaces where I feel like, the part of me that has learned how to show up in a white space is safe. Like, it's safe enough for me to show up as my white part. And then, but then there's like a part underneath that I am really skilled at. And I think that a lot of people of color that grew up in white spaces are really skilled at just pretending it's not there for a moment. And it's, and it took me a while to even track the discomfort of like, what's going on for me around this tension that I feel, where like, I don't actually feel that all of me is welcome here. I hear it, but then the times that I've tried to bring certain parts, they didn't land in a way where I felt there was resonance for that pain, for example. And what is it that I can bring as a facilitator is the journey for me is like, how low can I go with the ground that I'm holding? And the lower I go, the more people are included. And if I'm just holding here, well, I can hold people who are maybe like me if I'm a privileged person in whatever dimension. And then I can do the work independent of my identity, independent of any personal experience of marginalization. I can do the work to expand my capacity of holding. And I feel that is what I feel really passionate about and lit up about in this conversation, that I so long for this to not be a place of like, well, if you're a person of color, just go to a facilitator of color, or just go to a coach or therapist of color. But like, that we as a as a collective and as people who identify as facilitators can hold ourselves to a standard. This is our instrument. The spaciousness of our resonant, like our capacity of resonance and the container that we hold, that is our main tool. And I want to bring awareness to the necessary expansion in consciousness that will lead to the expansion of the container. For example, in this case, to work with people of color, that needs to happen for any facilitator who wants to offer that space.
Yeah. As you spoke there, the two words that were coming through for me were decolonizing circles. And how do we do that with the most amount of grace and love and care to bring the fire of this and hold it in love, because it can be messy, painful, uncomfortable. And I believe that's where, many facilitators kind of go around it. I see the freeze, I see the discomfort. So the inquiry I have is around decolonizing circles with fierce grace and love.
I love it. That's it.
And to keep love at the center of the circle space. I have an image now. My mind is very active in images today, but of this altar of love. It's like the altar is unity. And there's work to be done.
Yeah, I feel really touched by this, the clarity of your words. It is so clear to me that circle is this incredible practice of leaning into feeling oneness and feeling unity. That is the power. That is what I love so much about circle. On the way to leaning into unity and oneness, all these blockages to unity and oneness show up. And it's not just the individual blockages, but it is really this collective wounding that is in our face, and it is messy, and it shows up. And it shows up through our bodies. It shows up through the bodies of those who have, for some reason, an opening to feeling that collective wounding. And it is so deeply off to me to then add that is not supposed to be in circle, or that is somehow politicizing circle, or that is not, we kind of make a way around that, and to feel but then what are we doing?
What are we doing?
That is the work. If we are to lean into unity, my wounding as a person of color, that is not just my wounding, but that is the intergenerational lineage of wounding that I bring into circle through my body. I cannot lean into unity without that channel. I cannot disconnect myself from that channel. And if I am to be in circle, then this channel shows up in circle. And so it is with other people that bring other woundings. And my understanding of the very practice is how can we lean into love with, fierceness and grace, and not lose sight of what is the ultimate goal, and the ultimate goal being unity. Can we sit with the excruciating discomfort of what comes in when we actually gather, that it's not a nice, sweet practice of oh yeah, let's hold hands and we're going to just feel unity here. But it is the realest practice that I know of deep healing, of let's meet the fire here. Yeah. And it's not for the faint of heart. It is let's do it. Yeah, buckle up. Let's do it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, what you speak of there is courage. It's how do we bring courage to the heart of the holding? Even when knees are wobbling, even when every single cell in our body wants to swerve around it, how do we bring courage?
And it's deeply humbling.
Yeah.
To sit in a space and that we have to surrender the idea of we can hold it, that we it's like when everything wobbles, when the knee wobbles, when I don't know anymore what to say. And that is where real courage is needed, and the shared orientation to what is it that we are ultimately gathering around, and a reminder of like, we're doing the work, we're leaning into unity, and it is a mess and it's painful. Mm. And can we hold that pillar strong and clear, and fiercely stand with like, that is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And how, like, that's, I love the piece of like, and then yeah, nice. And then how do we do it?
Yeah. And I think that and how and the work is what holds so many people back from doing anything at all. What I've heard numerous times is, but what do I do? What do I read a book? Do I go on a course? Do I, it's like, but how? And this is what I'm holding in my hands right now. But how do we do this with the most amount of grace, knowing that it's going to get messy? Do we send every facilitator off on a journey to read a book and they come back anti-racist and, okay, well done. You've ticked the box. You've read the book, you've done the journey, you are officially in, you can read. What is this calling? Because for me, for a number of years, it was clear. It was, courses, it was social justice work. Followed the work of Resmaa Menakem, Nova Reid, Layla Saad. I had a list of teachers that I would follow and learn and unlearn and listen and squirm and sob and wail and rage. And for me, that was my path. And I do believe the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I was ready. I was ready to open my heart to really look and turn towards this. And it's changed. There's books I've read that I'm like, I have no interest in picking that up again at this stage of life. That part feels complete. It was really gung-ho at one point, like, I was raging. I had to have something to meet my rage. So I chose those places to put myself, to bring my rage, to unlearn, to look at my blind spots, but also to really experience the grief of what had been showing up for life for me, existing in this body. And if we travel all the way back to post George Floyd, it was everywhere. It was the fashion. It became this trend, this hashtag anti-racism. And everywhere I looked, somebody was having an argument about it on social media. Are you, aren't you? And it's just like, oh. Really, is this what we've got? Is this the level of maturity we have as humans, that we have to argue about this?
And I think it is. Like, I think that's the point. I do feel that the discourse has shifted from, at least in Switzerland, in the Swiss context, it was like, well, racism doesn't really exist. Like before 2020, that was the discourse, whether there is such a thing as racism in Switzerland. That was the maturity of the conversation. And the shift is like, well, there's now enough people that are somehow open to holding the truth that there is such a thing as racism, that is still perceived and lived and a felt experience by many people in Switzerland. And I feel like the level, or when you speak to maturity, is like, we're not starting from a very mature place here. It's baby steps. We're coming from at least in, like, I don't know how it is in the UK, but like in Switzerland, for sure, there's not much yet to work with. And then that's where, like, I feel that the steps get jumped, where there's like an awareness, but then quickly there's people I hear say, like, if people were to know who I am, they would know that I'm not racist. And I'm like, well, that doesn't help anyone. That is jumping over the next step of the work, which is the owning, the integrating, the sitting with, what you describe as the going down part. And I think that is what makes me really sad at times, where I'm like, oh, there is something really crucial that I feel we have a possibility that it could happen. And let's not jump over it. Let's not pretend that we're somewhere where we're not as a collective. We're not yet there. Like, let's actually acknowledge, where are we? what's actually going on inside me first and foremost, and then also, like, as we sit in circle, what's actually going on. And then we can start feeling into what are the steps. And probably it will be messy, and it will come up, and it will, not in every circle, not in every moment, but when it does come up, the worst thing that we can do is to not hold the space for it. Actually, it's a moment of grace that truth shows up. And the question is, how do we meet it when it shows up? And how do we care for the people who are offering that truth into the space? How do we care for their nervous systems that might be holding charge that is way beyond what their individual body can hold? Like, I have for sure felt that in my body, and I've seen it in other bodies, that there's, like, it's a lot of energy that mobilizes through that channel. And then it's like, okay, do we have a shared understanding of what is now needed for this nervous system, for this individual that is holding a collective truth, and it is bringing in an offering and making an offering towards truth.
Yeah.
I noticed that as I speak of these topics, how my energy gets like, I'm starting to feel the fire.
Yeah. There's two directions I'm like being pulled into. The first one is like the speaking of the fire and that energy that comes, which for me in moments has felt so huge that I don't know what to do with it. It's so big. And so what I often find myself doing is fawning, just to try and make it okay in that moment, because if I bring this, it's so big. The cost, the fallout is too great. Yeah. I know that place. I've bought it in a circle before. The outcome was not great. So my fawning became even better. Don't go there. Don't go near that. But the thing is, it's already there. It's already there. It's already existing in my body. It's already, and because, and I'm reminded of Ubuntu, I am because we are. I am because we are. Yeah, and this is the other avenue. And actually I see the connection now is that in that space, collectively, we are literally the micro of the macro. Here it is. I'm experiencing it. And if it's not spoken, here I am sitting, holding it, wiggling around in a circle, trying to move, before my body just goes, explodes or implodes. It's like, it's already here. And I'm imagining a circle where there's an acknowledgement of the freeze and the terror of it being in the space, and how that might be in the center. There is this freeze, there is this terror, and can we acknowledge it? Can we bring that here? Because that's what's going on outside.
And also that's the power of circle, that the energy is just amplified enough that it's actually not really possible to truly hold it. Like that there's like, like the wiggling, and then like, okay, like I need to do something with this energy. And I find that is the beauty and the power of circle, that it just amps up the energy to a degree where it just becomes apparent. I found it immensely powerful for me to feel whether I collapse or I fawn. Like, it's like these two options that I feel like that's what I'm trained in when I feel that fire. That's what I've trained myself my whole life. And the intensity with which I experienced that in circle just made it so unbearable that that's when I became aware of it. I wasn't aware of what I was doing until it actually blew up in my own face sitting in circle, where I didn't have consciousness around how much I was hiding, how much I was holding, how much I was fawning, how much I was collapsing internally. And that is the hope for, on one hand, individual liberation, that we can actually feel ourselves in what we're doing individually. And if we allow it, also the hope and the access to collective liberation and healing, that if we just gather, the energy gets amplified, and then all the pieces are just in our face, and we get like this incredible opportunity to just sit with it in a designated space where no one has to run off to do anything, but we are in our commitment of like, let's just meet what's here. We don't have phones ringing. We don't have like children to tend to in that moment. We don't have any other community commitments. We've liberated our time for this moment and in order to be present with what is. And then this shows up. And to me, it's like, wow, this is the coolest thing. We are given this incredibly unique opportunity to just meet the truth of the collective. And to find in that meeting point with truth, like, again, we come back to this question of like, who are we?
Yeah.
In the meeting of truth, and how do we act? How do we show up when truth arises? Where do we go from here?
And I'm hearing you say about like the collapse and the fawn. And for me, what sometimes comes through is the fight, the explosion, pop, I'm out of my body. And so as you spoke there, like imagining this new way of being, because this does feel like an invitation of a new way of being, particularly around really holding marginalized people, is a slowness where, like you said, the phones are off, the kids are, not there. And like, how do we meet this in the slowest possible way? Because the bouncing off in society, a lot of it, I believe, is because of the speed, which brings us all the way back to the beginning of the conversation when you were saying about, the space between the impulse and the reactivity. Not your exact words there. I can't remember your exact words, but I believe that's what you were speaking about. Was that right?
Yeah, between the stimulus and the response.
Stimulus and response. Yeah. Just to really kind of fine tune into that. It's like, what's happening? How do we meet the collapse? How do we meet the fawning? How do we meet the explosion? Everything else. When this comes in, this particular energy comes in.
And how do we tend to the nervous system of that being that goes through those experiences?
Yeah.
Because I do believe that there is, just like as based on our current understanding of nervous system activation and understanding of trauma, that the journey from a freeze into the liberating of just a fight and knowing that it's safe for me to bring out my fire, like that is such an important step in the liberation. Can we create conscious spaces where the frozen parts can move through the actual fight response and fight for their worthiness and their right to live? And I think, especially speaking in around marginalization, to stand and speak, liberate the voice, and to touch that fire and still stand, I had to go all over the place. And like that energy, the first many times that I touched it was so uncontrollable to my nervous system, because I had shut it down my entire life. Then the times it came, it was just, there was no way I could have controlled that energy. How can we create a container where that uncontained is welcome, not just as an individual expression, which is what I feel is already a lot of the culture that we do have, but also with this understanding of the added collective need for that and the awareness of like, who is holding that energy in the space, like looking around, like who's actually sitting in the space and who's holding which voice, and are they alone in that, and what is it that they need so that they are cared for as well? Can we have a shared awareness of the dimension of marginalization in circle and what that translates into as we actually do the work? And then we still with the how.
And this is where I believe, I'm speaking off the cuff now, as I have most of this, but this is coming through, that we have to draw back to ancient ways. Yeah, call upon the ancients and the wisdom and these baby steps that we speak of, you know, the little ones that are kind of coming in this infantile state to do this work, whatever this work is, and however contained or uncontained it becomes. It's like, how would we do this as a village? The question I have again and again is like, where are our elders, our wise elders? Who's holding the spaces? If we're all infants holding the space, it's going to look like kindergarten, right? A bunch of toddlers together. What's going to happen? And the elder energy, you know, is within us as well. How do we call upon the elder energy? How do we call upon the ancestors? And I do believe with this piece of work, whatever this looks like, it's important that it becomes ritualistic, that we call upon the ancestors, we call upon that which is greater than just the potential infants in the space.
I find that I like what comes up, and I'm really curious if that lives in you as well. Like I have experienced in spaces where ancestors were called in white spaces, like where I was the only person of color and ancestors are called in. There is a terror in me that arises around like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
This is not gonna go well. Like there's the awareness of how much wounding there still is and how little healing is actually embodied in the space. Where when I, like, as soon as I feel the invitation of ancestors being called in, my capacity to hide and to fawn and to hold back just goes out of the window. It doesn't feel safe to me. Like it doesn't, like, and I think maybe that is the underlying unsafety that is there anyway, and I don't feel it. It's kind of like it's just so familiar that I can hold it and I don't particularly feel it. But as soon as ancestors are called in, I feel like this, like it's not safe. It's not, and how it translates, it's like it's not safe for my ancestors to be in the space, and it's not safe for me to feel the connection. And like then there's this need of like, well, then I need to stand and I cannot collapse, and I need to stand for them and I cannot collapse, and then it's not safe for me. And there's like this whole new dimension of questioning safety that opens up for me. And I'm curious if like something resonates for you around that, or if it's very different for you.
No, it's interesting. It's really interesting you say that, because my experience of like my calling of my ancestors is that their hands they're on my back, and they are like holding me up. And I guess, you know, that at some level could bring it back to individualism. It's me, but their hands give me the courage to do what I need to do to stay upright in that space. So now what I'm with in this inquiry is I wonder if there were an invitation for the marginalized, depending whatever subject we're speaking of, the marginalized to call in those that can support them. And to be really, I keep coming back to this discernment in who's being called in to support. And ancestors to me goes far beyond the realms of human. Ancestors are the green beings, the plants, the ancestral stars, the sea, it's like life, ancestral life. So because I think the harm of like calling in my family members that were enslaved people, would I want them to come in? No, unless they were really clear, unless that channel were really clear that they have the capacity to support. But I believe ancestors, goes far beyond the realms of just human.
Yeah, I find that a really interesting question. Is it just what I'm inviting is unconditional support through this channel of ancestors, whichever form they come? And then I feel like there's, for me, also this question of, yeah, like, and it came up in our last conversation, and or in the first Tender Talk, this question around what is it that is needed of me, like what is what I perceive almost as a need to show up in a certain way and a need to stand in ways that they weren't able to. And I think that's kind of the, yeah, like the challenge, or that what I feel like, I don't feel it as unconditional support. I feel it as yes, there is a support through like a lot of energy that comes through me. And then there's also what I perceive as like an expectation almost of like, now I need to stand. Now I need to be the one who, whatever. And a need to, yeah, stand for and hold in value and defend against the whatever's else is happening in the space. And I'm intrigued by that differentiation of like, oh, there seems to be really different channels.
I'm really with the stand, like the quality of the stand that we take, and the stand from the fire that burns, which can sometimes be really useful, I believe. Not if it harms, but sometimes that fire needs to burn out that which is, no longer needed. And then there's another stand that I have, which is the standing with my stake in the earth, which for me is much more comfortable. Right, I much prefer that stand where it's just something comes through me, and to me that feels like it comes from the ancients. Something comes through me, and the words just can't ever remember what I've said. I've got no idea what's just. It's like I've just become a vessel, and there's different qualities in terms of ancestors. I don't know the answer. I don't have an answer. I don't even know. Yeah, I'm like really curious about this one. What are the expectations of my ancestors? I've never considered it before. I've heard people say, "You are your ancestors' wildest dreams." And like, am I? Am I? Because it sells jumpers and t-shirts and, am I actually my ancestors' wildest dreams? Got no idea. Makes a good Instagram post though, right? Am I their wildest dreams? No idea. Do I feel a connection and a resonance with them? Absolutely. Do I experience at times their absolute pain of living? Yeah. Do I experience their joy? Yeah. In terms of who calls who into the space, what beings, human or beyond, I think I just keep returning to the word discernment. And the more times I step away from a circle space, exhausted, the more I learn. And I don't want to learn in that way. That does not feel like a healthy way to learn, right? It doesn't at any level.
To fry your nervous system.
I'm frazzled. Yeah, but I learn. That's, yeah. My hope and wish is that we move into other ways of being now, beyond that way of being. Not to say that won't happen, but so that that is not the default experience for people that are in marginalized groups.
The journey that I see after this conversation is like, there is a journey through decolonizing circles which will lead us to embodied inclusion. So there's like a path for us to take, and the ingredient that comes up, like we've been talking about the how, it's not really a specific how, but for sure what I do know is that the ingredient of awareness and of consciousness expansion, of like just understanding what is it that we're dealing with here, what understanding just the reality. And I say just, but it's not easy. There's like so much complexity to our reality. And the first step, and I think it must be the first step, is to just be open and lean into understanding more of reality than we currently do. wherever we find ourselves on the spectrum of understanding, but just like, can we take steps into, I'm aware that I have blind spots. And where is my curiosity? What is it that I'm genuinely wanting to lean into to learn more, so that I, as a facilitator, or human in general, but speaking of facilitators, can offer more resonance to another human being or in any space that I hold and facilitate.
Yeah. And to me, what that says is, I'm doing this because it matters. In knowing that I'm doing this, I'm not going to get a certificate at the end of it or a gold star, and it's never going to be complete. And there's no one's going to say, well done.
It's not about getting it right. You're never going to get it right.
You're never going to get it right. And you're going to mess up and mess up and mess up and mess up. And brilliant. Let's at least mess up and be willing to do that than do nothing at all.
Because it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. And yeah, I come back to the Ubuntu. I am because we are. Because it matters.
Yeah. And that is already so much, to feel like that is what I come up again. Like it's not a lot that is required to just feel that the people that I work with, or in whose spaces I sit, or who like I co-create with, that it matters to them, that they are actually willing to meet the discomfort, which is a signaling it matters. Like, I am willing to meet the fire. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to stand here. I'm willing to educate myself and to lean into my own curiosity, not because I want to get a gold star and I want to do it right. And I'm just finding the way, how can I not fuck up and how can I not make a mistake? But because I claim for myself that it matters. It matters to my life enough that I will do it. And that is, I think that is currently my longing for all of us, to hold that stance. And I love how you put it with this clarity. Like,
Yeah.
It matters.
It matters. And the only way we can decolonize a circle is to decolonize ourselves and bring it together.
I feel like this is a good moment to complete this wave of conversation.
This wave.
Knowing that there's more, and that I definitely feel sparked in exploring more of the how, and what are like how can we step. And for now, I love that this is complete for now. There will be other waves.
See you on the next wave.